Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me. Do let me know if you can. I'm trying something a little bit new. As you can imagine, it's a little warm today, so not only have I lost the jacket, I have quite a large fan by the side of me. It's probably the first time I've had a big fan, but you see, we start as we mean to go on. But if you can't hear me, let me know, because I'm not sure how it's affecting the sound. So maybe you can hear it, but as long as you can hear me, that will be brilliant. Thank you. Thanks very much, Beth. I'm glad that you can hear, because I was a little bit worried. We have a great Friday, as usual, prepared and planned. We've got all kinds of great things to talk about, not only the latest records that have been released, but we're going to have a great old chat anyway. So I'm seeing you all come in. Nice to say. Yes, William, little warm is an understatement. Really hot yesterday, hot again now. If you're joining us anywhere in Britain, you can see we're in the midst of something of a heat wave. And I close my windows so that you can hear me and there aren't, as we had once, well, it felt like the end of the world outside. So it gets slightly warmer and warmer as we go on. So yes, I've prepared and hopefully we won't have much of a problem. But I can imagine all of you around as well are suffering in the same way. And I see other people from San Diego, from 27 degrees in Lancashire. That's exactly the same temperature it is here. I have my lemon and mint drink, and I see you in Northampton. Everything else is good, and lots and lots of people. Beth has managed to get sunburn while visiting graveyards in Gwynedd and Anglesey. That's good. And Cindy's saying it's actually quite cool in San Diego, so maybe we've taken that heat from you. But it looks like Gillian might have taken it. She's a bit closer. She's in Winnipeg. She's also had a heat wave, so it looks like the whole world is a little bit warmer than it was last week, and we're definitely looking for a little bit of rain. And what better thing to do when you stay inside than to do a bit of family history? And that's what we're all excited by. It's wonderful you can join us, and we can all talk about the question of the week. We can talk about all the other things that are going on. We should have Alex in the comments very soon. Hi, Tess. Hi, Roxanne. And William saying that the greenhouse is 41 degrees at the moment. Crikey, that's quite a big one. And Andrea from Stoke, and Gary from Exeter, lots and lots. And it's great that you're all here. So where do we begin? Let's maybe give it a little bit more before we throw in the records of the week, because there are some really good ones this week, and I'm sure they deliberately do it on the weeks I present to see how many I can get through without taking a breath. But we have some wonderful newspapers for you, and we're really excited about some things that are coming very, very soon indeed. I want to tell you, I really do, but we can't just yet. We're just putting the finishing touches to it. Some of you may know. If you do, keep your eyes peeled and just keep it quiet for a little bit longer, and everyone else I'm sure will be very excited when they do arrive very, very soon. And yes, so many newspapers. That's exactly it. So while we wait for the new mega release that's coming, we haven't slowed down at all. We have not stopped adding things, because we're the only website that delivers new records every single week. And they're always someone's ancestor, someone's relative. They'll help to tell more of a story. And what a bumper one we have for you this week. We've got some more records from our wonderful Catholic Heritage Archive. We've got new baptism, marriage, burial, and congregational registers from Southwark. And there are quite a few there, so that's quite exciting. Good place to look, and you won't find them anywhere else online. Good chance to take a look, particularly in these more urban areas. You may find your ancestors using these churches, especially if you've got Irish ancestors or European ancestors that have covered over. It's a really great place to find their parish of origin. I always like doing that. If you've got Irish relatives, it might be the key to unlocking where that John Murphy comes from. So really pay attention to those records, look inside. There's some great things. Includes also one of my favourite record sets on Findmypast is the Census of Westminster for 1893, and that's a Catholic census. It covers all the Catholics, but it also says, is that child's faith in danger? Is that child in imminent risk of joining the criminal classes? Really, really interesting, really fascinating thing to read. We've also added some more parish registers from Pembrokeshire. So for all of you who have Welsh connections like myself here, say Prynhawn Da, I know Ellie will probably be very excited as well by these, but we've added baptisms from 1921, marriages and bans from 1936, moving forwards every single year when we can for privacy. We keep going and we add more and more records, and eventually you'll have hopefully that year that you need to get your relative. And we just keep on adding. So really, really great that we can keep working forwards with these years. It means that, again, these collections, once they're published, that's not the end. There's always more to come, which gets you really excited. It's really, really good. And now to the large release, the big update. This is one of those ones that I'm going to throw a lot of names out there, a lot of places, locations. If one of these locations is where your relatives and ancestors are from, fantastic. Go to our newspapers and take a look. Wait until 5, though. Wait just a little bit. We don't want to see you disappear just yet. It's going to be there now forever, so don't worry. But if the name that I'm thinking of or the place that I name is not where your ancestors are from, even if it's not even nearby, don't let that stop you. Newspapers, as we say all the time, syndicate stories. These stories can come from anywhere in the country, anywhere around the world. Really, really interesting to look through. You might still find your ancestor, even though they're not from that particular area. And we also have some really interesting special interest titles that come this week too. So if your ancestor perhaps is a politician or was a nonconformist or a socialist even, all of these things are included in here. Even if you're interested in dress history and fashion history, there are some great extra editions that are coming, and some great trade union newspapers as well, and some good comedy newspapers too. So all of these are interesting and worth looking at. But here we go. We're going to try and run through these. So let's go on. And I know you're saying here about me being roasting. I've taken the jacket off. I feel very indecent right now while I'm wearing only 2 pieces on my 3-piece suit. And as Alex says, this is quite casual. This is as close to casual as we're going to get. And this is, yes, that's it. Linda's saying it's definitely hot when the jacket comes off. I think it's only ever happened once before in the almost decade that I've been doing this. So let's start with these newspapers. Here we go. So there is Bell's Penny Dispatch, 1842. The British Standard, 1857 to 1866. The British Statement, 1842 to 1843. The City of London Trade Protection Circular, 1848 to 1849. Cobbett's Evening Post, covering 1820. Concert Guardian, 1860 to 1896, 1899 to 1900, and 1914 to 1929. The Court Gazette and Fashionable Guide, 1838 to 1841. The Daily Politician, 1836. The Eastern Counties Times, with a range of title years from 1893 all the way up to 1935. High Life in London, 1827 to 1828. A London Packet and New Lloyd's Evening Post from 1801 all the way up to 1836. Myra's Journal of Dress and Fashion, 1875 to 1912. The New Court Gazette, 1840 to 1846. The Times, New Times of London, 1818 to 1828. The Nonconformist Elector of 1847. The Oracle and the Daily Advertiser, 1801 to 1809. The People's Weekly Police Gazette, 1835 to 1836. The Royal York, 1827. The Satirist, or the Censor of the Times, covering 1831 to 1844, 1846 to 1849. The Socialist of Edinburgh, in 1920, an era of much socialism and agitation. The South Wales Weekly Argus and Monmouthshire Advertiser, 1892 to 1896, 1899 to 1901, 1903 to 1905. The Southall Gazette, 1974 to 1976. The Town and Country Daily Newspaper of 1873. The Trade Protection Record, 1849 to 1850. The Trades Free Press, 1825 to 1831. The Waterford Star of Ireland, 1899 to 1901, 1903 to 1906. 1908 to 1913, and the Weekly Intelligence covering 1818. And those are just the new titles. We've also updated. Here we go. It's going to get bigger. Keep your eyes peeled. Remember where your ancestors are from, because we're going to play Ancestor Bingo. If you find something with your ancestor in, or a location that you're interested in, do tell us. Say bingo. These are all the newspapers that we've published this week, Julia, just in case. And there are still more. Here we go. Someone asking what I'm talking about, and I can imagine if you've come in straight away, this is going to be a one. So, updated ones as well. Aberystwyth Observer, the Barrow Herald and Furness Advertiser, the Birkenhead and Cheshire Advertiser, the Blackpool Gazette and Herald, the Bootle Times, the Brigus and Rastrick Gazette, the Coleshill Chronicle, the Cotton Factory Times, that's one of my favourites, the Dewsbury Chronicle and West Riding Advertiser, the East Riding Telegraph, the English Mail, the Essex Times, the Evening Irish Times, the Faversham Times, and Mercury and North East Kent Journal, the Fleetwood Express, the Fulham Chronicle, the General Advertiser for Dublin and all of Ireland, the Gorey
correspondent, the Illustrated Sporting News and Theatrical and Musical Review, the Imperial Weekly Gazette, the Kenilworth Advertiser here in Warwickshire, the Ladies' Own Paper, the Lancaster Standard and County Advertiser, the Liverpool Standard, General Commercial Advertiser, Lloyd's Companion, to the Penny Sunday Times and People's Police Gazette, the Midland Counties Tribune, the Mirror of the Times, the Monthly Times, the Morning Herald of London, the Nantwich Sandbach and Crewe Star, the Northern Daily Times, the Penistone, Stockbridge and Hoyland Gazette Express, the Retford and Worksop Herald and North Notts Advertiser, the Sleaford Gazette, the Southport Visitor, we're almost there, hold on, St Helens Examiner, the Stockton Herald, South Durham and Cleveland Advertiser, the Teignmouth Post and Gazette, the Warwickshire Herald, the Weekly Chronicle of London, the Westminster and Pimlico News, the Westminster Journal and the Old British Spy, the Whitstable Times and Herne Bay Herald, and the Widnes Examiner. There we go. So I can see all of these wonderful people saying bingo. We've got to the end of it. I see, Nicole, you've just joined. I imagine that was quite strange to walk into. I see some people saying bingo for Dublin, the Midlands, other people, lots and lots of great ones. There we go. Lots and lots of people enjoying this. Warwickshire as well. William with bingo to the police, Cheshire, Lancaster. And yes, you were saying there are a lot of newspapers. Definitely, I would say that's quite a one. There's lots and lots of people saying we've got some great titles. Diane, you're saying there's no bingo, but as we said, there are lots and lots of syndicated stories. So don't be put off. Still take a look. I always go back to those newspapers, and every month or so, I take a look for the same things and see what comes back. I like to look for my great-great-grandfather in there a lot, Silas Duffield of Darlaston in Staffordshire. And I look every month with those titles and those search about the year spans that he's there. And once in a while, I'll find him in a newspaper from Manchester or from Norwich, somewhere else. It will just be all over the place because of the fact these stories are copied and they're sent to other newspapers. So there were a lot of titles. Definitely you need to take a look anyway and just keep looking. Go back, periodically search. You have an interesting name, really easy to find, and just keep going back and check those numbers. I see lots of people saying they've got lots and lots of bingos. There we go, multiple bingos. And I see Carol joining us from the Scilly Isles, and you're in a holiday cottage. Well, that's exciting. I hope the weather's as good there as well. And Andrew's saying the paper's at lots of seaside places. Used to list who was staying at which boarding house. That's a very good point. There's lots of that. Oh, it's happened again, hasn't it? Oh, so there's a thing that happens on Fridays where we can't get probably, every single month someone comes out of the woodwork and we play, I guess, who's related to Myko. And it looks like Nicole also might be, with some relatives in Darlaston. If you have the surname Duffield, Whitehouse, Groves, and there are a few more that I can think of, then probably you are, because they're all from around that part of the world. And it seems no one can get away with it. It seems this happens every single week. And eventually we'll all be cousins. So let's keep going, and then maybe in a few years we'll have to have a big family reunion at some family history event or so. But I love the fact that we are all enjoying the newspapers as well. Sylvia said, good advice, keep returning, keep finding more. I definitely do. Debbie likes the newspapers as well. And then Beth is saying, that's it. You can find out every time I do this Friday live, someone else is related to me. So welcome to the family, Nicole. And I'm excited to see everyone else. And Groves, Helena. Oh, well, if you've got ancestors from Staffordshire and around the Black Country, then maybe we're cousins as well. This continues to happen. This is one of those strange things that I wish it was made up, and I don't think you could make up something like this. It's quite a one. And here we go. Cindy saying her step-grandfather's name she thought was rare, George Henry Cornforth, turns out to dime a dozen in Birmingham. That's one of those things where there are these names that are quite unique, and sometimes they're maybe just coming from one family, but that one family in that area tends to have a lot of children, lots of relatives, and they're all in one place. I've talked a few times about my Whisker ancestors. I love that name. And so far, everyone with the surname Whisker that I found all descends from this one family in a certain part of Northern Ireland in County Down, a place called Inch, which is a fantastic name when you've got inches of whiskers. But that is where I've seen them all descend from this one set of about 10 children in about the start of the 1800s. I'd love to find some from other places, but they all seem to go from there. And it's the same. If you can find that place where your ancestors come from, sometimes you'll connect all of the other people with the same name, which is a fantastic thing to do. But We're 15 minutes through. We've talked about all of those great new newspapers, those great new records. I hope you're going to enjoy looking for them. And if not, remember, every single week there are new things to look at, new things to explore, and new chances to find ancestors. So keep watching. Make sure you sign up to that newsletter and the like. But we've got that wonderful question of the week. And then, of course, Catherine has said she's in County Down. So if you're anywhere near Inch, Catherine, then let me know if you know of any whisker relatives that might be hanging around there, because I've not been, and I hear it's quite a beautiful place. So our question of the week was, what's the strangest thing that you have encountered, or most interesting thing you found in a record or an archive or online? So what have you found? What interesting documents, what interesting things have you got hold of, and what have they told you? Maybe about your own ancestors, maybe something else. Maybe you know of just a really strange resource that you found really interesting and fascinating. Tell us. Some of you may have spent a lot of time in those archives. Some of you may be only used to researching online. Doesn't matter where. Tell us what you found and where you found it and why it was interesting or fascinating. And we're looking for the strange thing. I see Catherine has said she doesn't know any whiskers. Well, that's fine. Don't worry. I'm sure they've all moved on, maybe, but definitely we're hoping that maybe I'll find some more of those at some point. So let's see what we've got. So Andrew has found a baptism in Leyland in 1815. John Sheba, I think I've pronounced that right, or Sheba, age 14. Parents unknown, a Negro released from slavery. Oh, wow. Sadly, he died just 3 years later. There's a fascinating story of a released slave from Ayrshire, a place he served a family up there. His name was Scipio, and he served the Kennedy family, so he became Scipio Kennedy. And he was freed by the family, and he then married and had a number of children. And there's a huge estimate of how many people will be descendants of this Scipio Kennedy walking around Scotland and further afield, and with no knowledge that they're descended from this freed slave. And there are a lot of records that you can find to tell that story. I was doing that on Findmypast relatively recently. He was in the Antenuptial Relationships Index, we call, for being caught with his future spouse. And that was a story that, of course, keeps on giving and telling. And there's a lot of detail in that story, so it's fascinating to hear that. And so Daphne said, the smell of the map room at Kew. That's the strangest or most interesting thing. Wow, yes, old documents definitely have their own kind of smell. They're quite wonderful, though, aren't they? I like to get hold of some old documents and just be around them. And definitely when you've got lots of them around you, you can definitely tell very different. Catherine's found some prison records for Cove. Brilliant description of a great-great-grandfather. Matches the current family. It's nice when things go through. Oh, that's an interesting one. Ros found a great uncle on YouTube accepting an Oscar for costume design. This is the kind of thing that I'm trying to dig into. And the point that I think we're getting to, and that's why I'm hoping for all these really exciting suggestions. There are no limits to where you might find interesting things. And some of them about your ancestors could be anywhere, whether it's a newspaper, great thing, could be in an archive, could be in a library, could be somewhere like YouTube. The amount of places you can look and find things, it's limitless. And so definitely take advantage of all of them. And hopefully you'll find something new and brilliant to add to your family tree. I see Alex there. He's a fan of the rude notes left in the Parish Registers of Sea Salter by the fiery tongue vicar, Thomas Patton. I know those very well, Alex. I remember quite a few that they talk about how terrible it is that these people have married, and one's a gap-mouthed lazy fellow and the other one's an old toothless wriggling hag. All those things that maybe you want to learn about your ancestor? Not so sure. So something to add to the family tree? I guess we want that, but we can't tell, as he's very rude to everyone, how accurate that might be. So that's quite an interesting one. I see Jenny saying her 2 times great uncle was registered as a girl. Then 25 years later, his father and brother swore an affidavit to say he was male. Added onto the birth certificate. He married and had 2 children. That's interesting. That's a story. I see Kim's got her 4th great uncle, Joel Witts, after being exonerated for seriously wounding a man in Cheltenham in 1827. Others were sentenced to death. He was later struck by a train and killed outright in 1848. You can't escape your fate, it seems. That's interesting. Jane has found a letter in a newspaper with full and harrowing story of how a ship was lost at sea in 1891, told by one of the few survivors. Oh, that's one of those ones that I think will stay with you, isn't it? On a happier note, one thing that I found when I was on the Isle of Arran at their wonderful little heritage centre where they have some records was a register of sheep's ears. And every farmer who kept sheep
would have this little diagram, this map of what their sheep's ears looked like, so that if one of them went wandering into another field, you could tell whose farm it came from, because they had certain marks or certain paint marks on their ear, and they could bring them back. And that was from the 1930s. So I knew that my relation's farm had ears with one blue spot on the left-hand side. So if I went back to the 1930s, I could pick out his sheep, which I think was a really interesting thing to look at. And I have that attached to his profile on his family tree. And so I know a little bit about him, but also a lot about his sheep. And of course, we love things like dog registers, the dog license registers and things as well. Great to see some animal-based books and records too. And William has said the archive rooms in Hong Kong must be full of camphor, as when the documents arrived, they smelt very similarly to the camphor wood chest to his parents. That's brilliant. It's great to see those kind of things. And I do like as well some of the archives in Italy where they put them in older buildings. And I think when we did our Italian talk some time ago, maybe about a year ago, we looked around virtually at one of those archives. I think it was Naples, which is in an old monastery. And they still have all the frescoes above you, all the great paintings of biblical scenes and things, the colours, the old woodwork, everything was there. And that is quite a majestic place to look at documents. So really, really interested in those kind of things. And that's not really a record, but it is an archive. So we'll count that as well. Really, really interesting. Sue met up with a fourth cousin who shared a copy of a common ancestor's will from 1847, handed down through his line, and contained so much extra information. That's good. It's great when these records actually just stay in the family. I know when people marry by license, often the vicar takes the license. Sometimes they hand it back to the couple, but it means they're not really in archives or anything like that. They're often just destroyed. They've looked at it. They don't need it anymore. So records of people marrying by license are fewer than they are, say, a marriage certificate or anything like that. And if you've got one still in the family, that's fantastic. And some of them can be very rare and very interesting as well. So really fascinating. Dawn found the Guardian mini books, Sheffield Archives, the workhouse sending her grandfather to the training ship Southampton for stealing pence at school and absconding as punishment. And he was 12. They definitely set them to it young in those ages, didn't they, to fix them up. And of course, yes, we've got that story to tell. Cindy found an old 1950 news video on YouTube of her grandfather, Bob Bulbrook, who was a politician, a Cockney Conservative who ran against Sir Mosley. Well, I hope he won. And obviously, we know Sir Mosley's ideas were a little bit different. And I'm glad that he never became Prime Minister. But yes, it must be great to hear those stories told in their own words. I do like some of the old videos on YouTube, and I posted a few on my Twitter account of things that I've started editing to make them fit, of people who are maybe 100 or 110 or something like that, and they're talking in perhaps the 1940s or 30s when they recorded about what life was like when they were a child, and they are amazing. And one day I hope someone who is a descendant of one of those people looks them up on YouTube and finds one of these great videos and sees someone who is that old, born in the 1860s or something like that, talking about what it was like and how things have changed all the way up to that point in the 1930s or 40s. That must be an amazing moment to see that. And I'm, of course, not going to find that myself, but I always keep my fingers crossed. But that was a wonderful thing to read, even though it's not my own family. I can take it in a social or historic context, but I do love that kind of thing, and I do hope someone will find that. See, here we go. So there's an interesting one from Jimmy here. The most interesting thing they found was an 1857 newspaper article giving a play-by-play of a criminal trial in County Down, where 2 times great-grandfather Robert Curran of Portaferry and 3 of his brothers, Thomas, John and Patrick Curran, was charged with inciting a riot, assault and battery for a series of fights, the first starting outside of a pub in Portaferry. Before the primary instigator, Robert Curran, went home to get his 3 brothers, went over to the old Portaferry gasworks, where a man called James Hayes worked and lived, and entered the property with the intention of beating up James Hayes, what my second great-grandfather and 3 of my great-uncles claimed was Mr. Hayes' incessant attacks of the Catholic Pope. That is amazing. That's quite a one. That's a story and a half. Those are the interesting things, aren't they, we can find in newspapers, and they'll only ever be in newspapers because of how unique they are, and how I don't think that governments of the day
have a way to record that. I don't think we have any Pope insults registers. And we see here they were found all not guilty on the inciting a riot charge, but found guilty on simple battery, sentenced to between 2 and 4 months at Crumlin Road Jail in Belfast. Hopefully you'll be able to find their prison records as well, Jermaine, so that would be quite interesting too. Ian met his great-grandmother in 1968. She was 100 in Plymouth. That must be great. I hope she had some stories to tell, and I hope you've written them down. That would be great. And it's even better if you could have recorded them. That's one thing that I always try and encourage people to do. If you've got a chance, whether you've got relatives or you want to record yourself or anything, do so and attach them to your tree or keep them safe somewhere. Any memories of you have of other elderly relatives or anything like that, perhaps people who've long since passed away that you can remember, record those memories, and hopefully someone who's a third or fourth cousin or something would love to hear about their great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents that they've never met, perhaps because they live in a different country or something like that. It's a great gift that you can give, and it's a wonderful family history, selfless act that you can do. So I really encourage that as much as you can. See Cindy's story with Bob Bulbrook. He lost by 1, but the Mosley came in last, so that's not so bad. That's okay, as long as that goes from there. And Anne found the newspaper article on the inquest of her 3 times grandfather's accidental death in Wigan. They're really interesting. And if you hear something about an inquest, go and try and find the inquest documents as well, not just the article. You might find a little bit more detail. We've got some wonderful documents relating to things like that, hopefully coming soon to Findmypast. So keep your eyes peeled there. Beth has been digitizing various documents. She's got a lot of photo albums still to work through. The write-up of Anne's grandparents' wedding in 1929 was found. That's quite exciting because sometimes you'll find everything from the gifts that were given to different people to the way the wedding was taking place, or even the things that people wore. Really exciting, sometimes even photographs too. Really great to see. That's one of the great reasons we love newspapers. William noticed the Irish collection on Findmypast, and the 1920s independence records appear to be full on Findmypast, but some are still closed until 2023, and some closed for another 29 years at Kew. So they seem to be an alternative to the missing census. Lots of information is given. Yes, we always listen to privacy or anything like that, but it depends on what the archive tells us to do. So the records that we have online are the records that the archive lets us publish. But yes, definitely anything you can think of as an alternative to a census, anything that gives you detail, use it. Trade directories, postal directories, electoral rolls, anything that you can think of. At this point, we're looking at the 1920s. Pretty much all men could vote and many women. So it's a great place to start and to try and find people if you're looking for addresses and things like that. And then, of course, England and Wales has that census to come. So we're really exciting. Scotland too, a little bit later on. And hopefully the 1926 Irish census won't be too far away, and I can find my grandfather there and enjoy that as well with the rest of you. So it's great to see all of this. So yes, we're asking the question, what's the strangest or most interesting thing you found in a record, in an archive or online? And we've had some great comments so far. It's been really exciting. And hopefully, as well as all the great new records that have been published, you've found some new things in general, because there's so many records already online. Have you found anything great in the past week? Tell us about your great discoveries. I see Rosalind saying Australia's census is next month. So fingers crossed that you fill that in with a lot of detail. I think in Australia, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have the choice, do you, to have your record preserved for family history and for other purposes to be exposed in a century. And so it's up to you if you allow that to happen, I think, if I remember rightly. But outside of that, it's usually destroyed because they just use it for statistics, which is a shame. And in Australia, we tend to use things like electoral rolls and postal directories and things like that to fill the gap, voters' rolls and things as well. But yes, there we go. So Rosalind said they have a choice, and definitely she allows. It would be great if you did the same, everyone, if you're here in Australia. But of course, it's always up to you. But 100 years, we shouldn't have to worry about that ourselves. It's great, though, to leave a mark for future genealogists. And I see Anna said that they even found the colour of her dress. So she's got an old black and white photograph. That would be the marriage thing that she found. So that's great. Roxanne's husband's aunt recently gave him a copy of an interview with his grandfather. He was a resident of the month at a nursing home he was in. They interviewed him for their newsletter. This is the thing, Roxanne. There are so many of these little resources that are around. Many of them are in the
furthest corners or the strangest places, and they can give you so much detail. Really excited to find those kind of things. I've found little church newspapers and bulletins that have been published just by that local church. Sometimes they're stored in that church and they haven't been put anywhere because they weren't considered that important. But of course, they're for family history. Everything's important. So what better resource to start rooting through and see if you can find some announcements or notices. All these different things are around. They exist, and we're just racing against time to try and find them. So definitely keep your eyes peeled and think what you can do. Google is always a great thing to start with. You never know what you might find. And there's always, again, so many records in interesting and strange places. See, William said, if it's useful, Carlisle Library has the archives from the Lowther estate. Other resources will be at Chatsworth too. I think that's a reply to a question. And estate papers are a great resource too, with full of interesting detail. You can have people who worked for particular families, people who worked on estates. You might have when they started, when they left service, maybe some details. Perhaps they left service because they had a child or they got married. That might be enough to tell you where to look for records. It might tell you where they moved to if they left. These are all great things to look for. If I find that someone is a servant in a stately home or in someone's house, then I will often go to newspapers and try and find the help wanted ad for this house and for this family, looking for the name of the head of the household and that family name, because then I might have an idea of how long they've worked there, and that can really help. So that's one of my clever tips I like to do, and you'll often find that. So that's an interesting one. Alison found a film on British Parthey, the first car going up the steep track from the mining village of Nantgwytherin, where my dad lived in the 1930s. I think one of the children playing might be my dad. That's an interesting one. That's really good. Sometimes it's really, really tantalizing when you find these videos or these photographs and you're sure one of those people in there might be a relative, but you just can't quite pin it down, isn't it? It's one of those things we need a bit of recognition, and it's difficult. Beth managed to get into one of the local churches this week on Anglesey. It had a leaflet that gave some of their history. Very interesting reading. And Sue's third cousin sent a local history booklet with an article written by her mother about the family. There are lots of those local history and social history, self-published books, some little family history books. And don't trust them completely, but they're a really good guide to point to places that you can then confirm the research and make sure you've got something solid. So they're a great pointer in the right direction. Just don't always take them as truth. Take them as research tips, and then go and find some evidence to document those claims, because everyone can be wrong, even ourselves. Until we've got some evidence, we're never quite sure. I see Sue is part of a heritage team for a church. They've got parish magazines covering many years, including World War II, naming parishioners and the amount they've donated to church causes. So that's exactly what we're talking about. Some of those are great. They give you a bit of an idea about the family that someone's from, some ideas about their status, some ideas about where they are, what they're doing. Sometimes you'll find things like pew rentals, particularly in older churches. So you'll know which family sat where in the church. And that's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Being able to sit where your great-grandparents sat in a church when you go and take a look at that. I know it's quite magical to see the font that your ancestors were baptized in, or the altar that they married at. But isn't that great to imagine, to sit where they sat every week? That would be something very, very fantastic. Roxanne's husband's grandfather was a prisoner of war during World War II, so it was very good to read a bit of his experience. We've got some great records of interviews with prisoners coming back from the Second World War. And although you may not find your particular ancestor in there, if you know where your ancestor was, your relative, then you can read an account from that place, and you can get a feeling for what life was like for them. So don't be put off that you can't find the name. If you know the place, take a look at those as well, and you'll see some incredible detail about the things people ate, what they exercised with, the way they were treated, and some really, really important stories that need to be told and shared. Very, very interesting and very worth checking out. So we've got Beth has written a biography on her grandfather as a Japanese prisoner of war in World War II. Excellent, Beth. I hope you've checked out those records as well and had a look. And so you should check for recent newspapers. We're helping in our local museum, indexing newspapers. She came out the article of our own high school graduation, 1973. She made a copy and added it to her own records. That's it. Don't forget that going forwards is just as important as going backwards. If you can add more detail, you can really help others and yourself when you're telling the story. We're only the custodians of family history, something that I say a lot. And that's important, because the more we put on about ourselves and our details that we can pass along, then the next generation knows plenty about us, and that helps them as well to pick out what our lives are like. And we see Kim found her maternal grandmother's cousin died in the Battle of Jutland on HMS Broke. Arthur Cheetham, age 20. I hope you've looked at our naval records. You might find some detail in there. And here we go, we've got some more. So Jenny discovered a novel had been written based on the life of your smuggling ancestors. That's an interesting one, Jenny. Oh, I hope it was a good book, because I've read a book about one of my ancestors, and it was interesting, but I don't think I would recommend it. So I won't share the title, because you don't need to rush off and buy it or anything like that. I wouldn't worry, but yes, I hope it was enjoyable. So that's good. And there we go. So we've got some more. Beth has checked out those records of the prisoners of war, added to a collection of documents. He just needs to get his records from Ministry of Defence. Definitely do. If you can apply for someone's records, the service records from the MOD, do so. They're full of detail, really, really big. And Alex is just sharing some great links as he's going. He's always nimble with his fingers. He knows exactly where everything is. He is the searching wizard, and he's just pulled through our Jutland collection to take a look and give you some more detail about those who served at the Battle of Jutland. I see Anya is visiting for her birthday tomorrow, and I see some people wishing happy birthday, so that's great. I love our bit of family that come through. We are our own little Findmypast family, and it's wonderful to have you all here together as, well, definitely my family, because we are all related, but I think we're family in spirit anyway. Sue has a booklet written about the history of a church in Wick in Scotland. Her 3 times great-great-grandfather had built as it was closing. It's now a furniture store. The people let us walk around as they haven't changed it much when they took it over. That's interesting. A church made into a furniture store. That's a very interesting one. I wonder, was it a free church? If so, we've got some wonderful records for that. They're really worth taking a look at. And if not, there are some other records that might be interesting coming. Who knows what they might be? So keep your eyes peeled. I can't stop teasing, but soon we'll know. And there you go. Alex has shared as well. For those of you looking for World War II service records, go to that link, start the process. It takes quite a while, and I know Corona has slowed things down a little more. But put it in there so it's always cooking. It's always waiting for you, and I like to make sure there's always something cooking. So that's it. So Sue, yes, it was a free church. Take a look at our Highland Free Church Index. It's brilliant. They're exclusive. They're online for the first time, and they are really interesting documents. They've got lots of extra detail in. Really very, very interesting. When will you know? You will know very, very soon. Trust me. So it's all coming. And there's lots to talk about when that comes. Robert found an article about a 6 times grandfather who was squashed between 2 train cars. Oof, I can feel that just by saying it. And I've got a relative that happened to. It was a very dangerous place working on the railways, or even hanging around with the railways at this sort of time. So, yeah, it was a very, very risky place to be. So I can understand that one. And I see... so I can always see Italian when I see it coming out there. And I found some information on my husband's maternal grandparents and some of the minutes of elders meetings of Warrenford Presbyterian Church, says Carol Latterly, the United Reformed Church in Northumberland. They were key members in the founding of the church and keeping it going. And that's it. It's interesting. Lots and lots of church members, the religions that our ancestors had, the faiths they kept, can tell us a lot about their lives and lifestyles, and a lot of records are created. I definitely... If I find any piece of information about a relative or someone, I will chase it down relentlessly. Obituaries are very good for this. I've often used a obituary of my great-great-grandfather, Myko Clelland, and in there it describes his sporting achievement, describes that he was a member of the Ancient Order of Foresters, it describes where he worked, what he did. All of those little clues I followed up. The Ancient Order of Foresters, I got in touch, I spoke to their archivist, and they went to look, and you might even find a photograph in these other archives. These are the places I just chased and chased. I found out the name of the football club that he played for. I asked them. Unfortunately, the original one doesn't exist. They're remade, and so they didn't have any records. But again, it's worth a go. All of these little clues that you get in any of these records, chase and chase and chase. Don't give up. Find things. Find out where they are. Keep looking and looking and looking. And I see Karen is here. Welcome, Karen. And there's lots and lots of other people talking about the great things that they found. William is sharing they found some great stuff at the International Red Cross. Internees in various wars. 12 years ago, they got their great uncle and aunt's records. including a brief note sent home telling the family how they were. It's fantastic. There are some great little places out there with lots and lots of details. I see Marie has said someone else traced things back on the site. Apparently, your family are related to Princess Diana, 11 times removed. My great-great-uncle was a member of the 1928 Olympics weightlifting team. I think for the Olympics, there's definitely going to be some newspapers and some details that you can find to add some detail there. For your detail of Princess Diana, I would say take a look around, look at those records and look at the path that people have taken. But again, use it as a clue. Don't take it as fact until you found your own records to prove the path. So that's a nice way to start, but make sure you've got some records to back things up. And that's what family history is all about. It's about proving your hunch or your idea and getting to what you need to get to. So best of luck, Marie. Hopefully you will find that royal touch, and maybe then you can send William a little message and maybe come to some of his parties, his garden parties. Let's see what else we've got. Lots and lots of detail here from lots of other people saying about all the great things they found in archives. Lots of people wishing happy birthday. That's great. And it's nice to see all of our regulars getting on well together, being great best of friends. Cindy found, she looked for the 30 years for the World War I grave of great uncle Harry Brooker. His wife had 4 middle names and used them all in the pension request. Now that's going to be easy to find, isn't it? I love a good middle name. The Scottish tradition is quite good, where you have your maternal maiden surname as a middle name. That's very, very helpful. And she got his service number and found him buried in Sofia in Bulgaria, of all places. There are a number of Allied soldiers from the First World War buried around there. So that's not as uncommon as you may think. It's an interesting thing, and it's definitely unexpected, but you can definitely find that. So that's one of those strange things to find as well. I see lots and lots of these descriptions, and that's great. So what else do we have coming in? It's one of those hot days when my mind clears for a second. I'm going to start thinking about all of the things and different archives I've found, and hopefully I can throw some more in myself. And I'm trying to think, what great records have I come across recently? The criminal records, the registers with photographs are always exciting. We've got a large collection of those on Findmypast, and seeing those people's faces is something magical, particularly in the 1800s when photography was very expensive. And so getting hold of a photograph when these people probably were working class, because we had no social net, social security or safety that these people could fall on. They usually had fallen on hard times and had to steal to survive. Then those people, you might see the only photograph that has ever been taken of them. And usually when you look at them, they're doing something like this or this, and they're not proclaiming their innocence or doing jazz hands or anything like that. They're showing their hands because a lot of people worked with their hands at this time. And so it might be another way of identifying you. So you can look at, say, my hands, and they'll probably look different to your hands. And so it's another way of saying how if you've got the right person or anything like that. So it's a great other bit of information. And of course, when we look at prison records themselves, outside of these mugshots and photographs, we can see the descriptions of these people. And that's one thing I like to do. I might be a little weird, but I like to look at the descriptions in these records and then compare to the photographs of these people, because then I can get a feel for when I find my own ancestor and I read what that description says, then I can know what each one really means. And when they say this person was swarthy, I can look at some swarthy folks and pale folk, and I can say, right, he had this kind of face. And then I get a better impression of what my own ancestor looked like. So that's one of the big things I like to do. It's a strange thing to do, but it can help. And that's very, very helpful sometimes. I see there's some list here. There, Alex again has caught. The crime records are amazing. There they are. You can find that link. Really, really helpful. Beth does the same thing, likes reading descriptions, seeing photographs, shows what they look like. We did the same for merchant seamen. There's a collection of those, a little run with photographs. Not all of them have photos, but some of them do, and they are wonderful to see. Again, it's brilliant to find things like that. Passport applications. If you've got relatives that travel to the United States, often they wanted to come back and visit their family back at home in Britain, and they will have got a passport after that to do so, particularly after about 1914. And then you'll see the photograph when they have that, and that's a really exciting thing too. Lots of places to find photographs. Sometimes you'll find them even again in local libraries, local archives, and again, newspapers. Always. We keep using that word because it is the magic word, newspapers. I think we're going to have to start casting our own spells to find records of our ancestors. We just say newspapers, 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 and then eventually something will appear. And I see people talking about middle names as well, how great they are. I wish there were some really exciting middle names that we could pull through, and everyone would have to use them. I know in some countries you can't even choose so much your first names because you have to pick from a list. I believe Iceland, I think Sweden as well. I think there's a list of about 100 first names and boys and girls, and then you have to choose from that. You can't go off the list. You have to pick. Maybe Denmark as well, I think as well. But it's one of those things that different countries have, and that makes it very difficult sometimes when you have not many combinations, and particularly with patronymic names as well. I've done a little bit of research in the Faroe Islands, which is just north of Scotland. And there, of course, they have patronymic names. So when you're looking for Sven Gustafsson, and then his children, maybe Gustav Svensson, and then it keeps going. Trying to keep some run of family is very difficult indeed. So that can be a little hard, particularly in a village when you have 4 or 5 people named Sven or something like that. So that can get more harder and harder. But luckily, at least in Britain, we don't have that problem so much. Although patronymic names are used in Scotland, in the Highlands and things, and you will find them dying out just at the end of the 15, 16 and 1700s sometimes, and you'll see that a little bit. Also in Wales it happened for quite some time, and that's why those Welsh surnames, many of them are things like Jones, which is son of John, Evans, and other different names drawn from that old patronymic tradition. So everyone with Jones isn't related to the same person. They all happen to be son of John when they were told, you better get a surname. Surnames are what we're doing nowadays because King Henry VIII really wanted to make everyone a bit more English. And I don't know if he succeeded, but he definitely had a go at trying to carve out the world in his own image. What a strange way we could look at the world if perhaps his brother had survived, King Arthur. Everyone named Arthur who's a king never really gets there, do they? So I think maybe that name is one of those ones people are reluctant to use nowadays. And I think now if we have a King Arthur, I think people would just laugh at them. So we've lost the chance to have a good King Arthur, but definitely one of those interesting stories. I know I'm going off on a tangent now, but Sylvia found a chap with 4 names in and out of jail like a yo-yo in the 1920s and 30s. Eventually, he dropped his surname and stuck with his 3 Christian names. Only found that out via a newspaper report. You'll find in the court records quite often, with the actual records of court proceedings, aliases. They'll say also known as or alias, and they'll list them. And sometimes you'll get 8 or 9 different aliases listed there. And that's a really good document to find if you can get hold of it, because then you've got a list of who else to look for. I see there Roxanne saying her son has 2 middle names. You're preparing for future genealogists, aren't you, Roxanne? We usually only use one on paperwork because there usually isn't room for both. That's true. It's very difficult when you have a very long name trying to fit it in, particularly when computer things and stuff only let you have so many characters. And Sue's niece married a young man with heritage from Oman. His first name is followed by a name of father, grandfather, great-grandfather, then family name. I've seen similar in Spain, I think, as well. They do clever things with their parents' and grandparents' surnames and things. It's a great way of capturing tradition. But it's very hard to, I would say, crowbar these ways into our British system. So sometimes they'll do as the Welsh did and cut off parts and just keep one name or something like that, which means you lose some of that, particularly over a few generations. So it's a little bit sad, but it does mean that if we can get back far enough, we have that. I know in Hungary and other parts of Europe, they talk about things the other way around. So they tend to use the surname first and then the first name, which is the easier way for them to remember and record things. So that's one of those things that can trip you up if you're looking in different parts of Europe. One of the great records from parts of Europe that I like, of course, I'm going to mention Sicily. They have a census that goes all the way back to the 1500s. It's very exciting. The Rivoli di Beni ed Anima, the Book of Goods and Souls. And so that book covers, of course, taxation, things that can be taxed, all the things that people own, and of course people who wanted that tax money wanted to make sure those peasants didn't get away with it. So some of the early books, the very early books from the 1500s, have line drawings of the peasants involved. So I can see a line drawing picture of my very poor farming ancestor from the 1500s, and that's amazing.
And boy, did he have a big nose. But maybe the person wasn't good at drawing. We'll find out. But it's fascinating to see, and those are the quirky, interesting things we can find. There are also some great paintings that have been taken and made over the years, and maybe you're lucky enough to find someone who's had a painting taken of them or made of them, even if it's a sketch or something like that, and they can happen. One of the great places to look for that is museum catalogues. They will list the name of the person who sat, the person who is the subject to the portrait, the sitter, and then you'll be able to find them. National Portrait Gallery has them. I like the Scottish National Portrait Gallery. Again, they have people from around the world. Don't worry if it's just Scottish you're looking for or not. That's not too relevant. Also, the Victoria and Albert Museum have lots of objects. If your ancestor was a worker of any kind, you might find something they've made. I found my ancestor, I think he was called Josiah Wilkes. He was a lockmaker, again from Darlaston in Staffordshire, and I found one of the locks that he made. I think I shared it on the Findmypast forum some time ago, but I found out exactly something that had been in his hand that he had carved himself and created, and that was a magical moment. And if you ask very nicely, I'm sure not quite yet right now, but very soon, you might be able to even go and visit it, and they'll get it out for you, and you can have a look and maybe hold in your hand something that your ancestor made, and that would be an amazing thing, wouldn't it? So if not, you can still definitely get some photographs of it and add them to your family tree too. I see Beth said she's got a painting of her great-grandmother who was painted by her sister. So there are some fascinating things that you can find with these paintings. There definitely are. I don't have many paintings. I've got a painting of a distant cousin. I think we've mentioned a few times. My actress cousin, Sunday Wilshin, who she's in the National Portrait Gallery, and she's got some nice paintings and some nice photographs. I think she's wearing a dress made of dustbin bags at some point, and there's a fashion photograph that comes from one of our newspapers. It's also in the portrait gallery as well. So she was quite a fun character, but definitely those paintings are great. And Daphne has a copy of a painting, Piper Donald Cameron, her great grandfather as well. And that's a great thing too. There are some great books of caricatures or characters of different people. I know that there's some in Edinburgh, and we looked at those a little while ago with some colleagues and some wonderful volunteers, which I'm scribed some. Hopefully we'll maybe put them online at some point. But they are drawings of just people who are interesting folk around the city of Edinburgh in the 1700s. And it's great to think that your ancestor may not have been rich or been able to afford a big, rich oil painting, but still they were known enough to be that lady who sold oysters at the docks or anything like that, and you have that bit of story, you have the name, and you can say, there we go, I've got a drawing of my ancestor from the 1700s. And those kind of great stories and great things can really help. And of course, that might be the only way we can see what our ancestors look like. So don't discount those too. And some of the stories in there can be very witty, let's say. They can tell you the good and the bad about your ancestors. I've been doing up my house, as you can see, my new home. And there's a picture just above. There's some pictures on the other side, and I'm adding pictures slowly. But in my hallway, I have some of these caricatures of one of my ancestors from the 1700s, and he's definitely a large fellow, and I can see that from there, and I can see his face and expression, and it's amazing to see that. Again, I haven't got a painting, but I've got these caricatures, and I can maybe imagine what he looked like. So it's great to see those as well. And Andrew's got a really good point as well. He came across an early 1700s clock by a local maker for auction, managed to contact a relative to alert them. Auction sites are very good as well, finding those. You might find something made or owned by a relative. At the moment, I think on eBay, I've seen a few times, there's a ring, a mourning ring with a lock of my ancestor's hair. The one I just mentioned has got a drawing. And it's a bit too expensive for my tastes. And they've made up a story around it as well, which is very frustrating because it's not true. And I know it's not true, but I think they've put that story on to sell it. They said that he's related to Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, and he's not at all. And definitely not. But it's interesting to see that thing, and I've got a picture now of that ring, so I don't have to worry about buying it. I have the picture, and I can add that to my family tree as well, so I'm happy enough with that. And I see Patricia has a charcoal portrait of herself by John Wotton of Windermere. He was a prisoner of war in Colditz and forged papers for escapees. Now, that's a connection to history, Patricia. That's really, really interesting. That's fantastic. And I see Jamea's found in an online search 2 plays that her grandfather wrote and copywritten for protection here in the USA, one of which was made into an off-Broadway production in the late 1950s in New York City. There's someone who used to work at Findmypast, and we do that Secret Santa thing, you know, And for Myko, because I found them, and they had found a story about I think it was their grandfather, maybe their great-grandfather, had saved some lives. He owned a ship. He was a Scottish man, and he owned a ship that had just by chance found a sinking ship in the American Civil War, and it was full of Union soldiers. So his ship went alongside, and he saved all of these people's lives. They all got onto the ship, and for that, they didn't drown. And as thanks, they had this little event, this little parade, and they made this polka for him, in honor of him. And I found the piece of music in, I think it was the National Archives in America. And of course, as this was from the 1860s, this had never been recorded. So I got out the piano, I got a friend to help me, and we recorded that polka that hadn't been recorded ever before. And we made a recording of it. And we gave that as the Secret Santa gift. So she had a recording from a song that had not been heard for maybe 150 years. And that was quite exciting. And again, it was in honor of her ancestors. So there are so many strange things you can find that can really be interesting and help. And we see lots and lots of extra things. So again, objects. Roxanne has a wooden high chair in her family made by her 2x great-grandfather. And Sue owns a copy of a portrait of her 4x great-grandfather. Lots and lots of great objects as well, just as good as having been able to see them. If you can own them, even better. I do suggest as a thing, if you are going to one of these auction sites or you're doing anything and you want one of these objects, please don't tell them that you're related to that person. Just inquire out of curiosity, because if some people are not as honest as you or I, and I don't want you to come awry and come unstuck. So if they think that you definitely want this thing and you have to have it, they might charge more, or they might do something like get someone else to bid to get the price up or something, knowing that you want it a lot. There's lots of things like that that might mean that you might end up paying more than you have to. So just be casual and nonchalant when you try and get hold of these things, and it will definitely work better. I made that mistake, so you don't have to. So remember that when you're doing it, you have to be a little savvy. And of course, yes, there are some people that aren't so kind and happy as us. Here we go. Thomas Clark's great-great-grandfather was color bearer for the 4th Minnesota Volunteer Infantry Regiment in the U.S. Civil War. He was able to see the battle flag he carried at the Minnesota Historical Society, and then the leather belt which he embossed his name on. That's amazing, Thomas. That's really cool. I remember lots of these things that have been put in these museums, regimental museums, local history museums. They've all got names and things attached to. We know who originally wore them, and you can go and see them. You can perhaps, if you're lucky, get a chance to touch or to get really up close to these things that you know a relative was involved with. And that's an amazing feeling to know that you're looking at something they looked at. You're standing where they stood if you're in a certain place. I'm going to do a little bit of local family history research only in about a week's time. And I'm going to be off in Darlaston and Wednesbury and Willenhall and all those places around Staffordshire. And I might try and get myself to Stafford Jail and find the spot where my great-great-great-grandfather was executed. I think it was 3 times great. I always lose the greats. But when he was executed in 1819, hopefully I'll get to stand near where he died. And I think the courtroom that he was found guilty in is now a bit of a museum. I'm going to try my hardest to see if I can get in there and stand there. Maybe I'll collect a photograph and show you. But it's going to be one of those amazing moments, I think, to be in their shoes. I don't know what I'll feel, because I know his last words now, and I think it's a very emotional story. I know we did it for our video a little while ago. I think it was around Christmas when we talked about our own ancestors' tales, and it's one of the very moving stories. So I'm looking forward to doing that, as only genealogists can do. But definitely, I recommend anyone do that if they can. If they know bits about their ancestors, go and stand where they stood, do what they did, and live as they lived. Read about all the things that they go on, and read the newspapers where they came from. Read what they read, everything they did. Do it as well, and see, and maybe you'll get a newfound perspective for your relatives and ancestors. It is great. I see Sue is saying, be canny. Definitely do. Whenever you're trying to get hold of all these things, do remember that that's the best way to look at it, because we are genealogists. We know what we want, and we've got to try and be clever when we're trying to get them. So I always recommend that as well.
Rosie found via Google a recording of her great-great-grandfather singing folk songs in 1909 as part of a project by Percy Granger to record British folk songs. There's a friend of mine who I'm determined to get on to Find My Past Live, and some of you may have heard of him, but I won't give the name, but he's won a Mercury Prize for his efforts to preserve old British folk songs, and he records songs from the 1600s, 1500s, even the 14 and 1300s that have only been passed down orally through generation to generation. He goes to various different gypsy camps and different places to record these and just to try and get hold of them and put them down before they disappear forever. And it would be amazing perhaps to get him on and maybe get him to perform a couple of these songs. There are some wonderful stories in there. There's a great one about a woman falling in love with a man who died. And again, the way that people look at the world can tell you a lot about how they lived, and it talks about the harvest and farming, and it gives you an idea of how important marriage was, and just gives you some feeling of that world. And so very, very interesting. And I'm hoping that maybe we'll be able to get him on pretty soon. But hopefully that will be a good session. And there's always a lot of choices of things we can do. We also have some great stuff with theatre going and performing ancestors that are going to come up soon as well, I can think of, as well as the other stuff that we've got to talk about. There's no ending of different topics and great guests that we can have on. But as we talk about that, we have reached 5 o'clock here in the UK. And that means that we have to say goodbye, which is a shame because I love my time with you guys. I think it's brilliant, and I love the fact that we're all here talking. We've got so many great stories, lots and lots of wonderful interactions, and lots of people here that know everything there is to know about their ancestors, and that's great. But there's always a hunger for more, and that's what a true genealogist needs. I'm really excited and honoured that you choose to spend your time with us here at Find My Past on our weekly meetings and gatherings together. I love that you come to see us on our midweek sessions as well. I love to see you every month. Next month, maybe I have some great revelations, and I definitely will have lots to talk about in the next couple of weeks, so you won't be hearing the last of me. But for now, it's time to take a well-earned rest and go back and do some of my own family history, perhaps. And so in the meantime, I hope you do too. If you find some great things, or you have some great questions or things that you're stuck with, go and check out our Find My Past forum, and maybe someone able to help. Go and explore all of those wonderful new records. There might be something here for you. And if not, keep your eyes peeled, because every week might be your week. And definitely keep on climbing around, looking inside your family tree and building and growing it, because you never know what you might find somewhere in the branches. So have a wonderful weekend. Hope to see you very, very soon. It's been great to share the time with you. And of course, best of luck again. In bocca al lupo.